Thank you very much. So I taught anatomy and physiology here for 32 years. And so that's why as soon as I heard the word, I knew instantly what I wanted to talk about. So I actually want to start with a demonstration of something not alive before we actually talk about what's going on inside of us. So we all recognize that there is a finite amount of air in this balloon. Right? It's tied, so no more air can come in. It's not porous, so the air is not pouring out. And we know that there's some kind of pressure in here. But by sitting just by itself like this, what's the likelihood that this balloon is going to pop? Not very likely, right? Even the president knows the answer to that one. Yes, it's a no. Okay, but what can we do to increase the chances it would pop? I could squeeze it. Now, I'm not going to pop it in case anyone's going to freak out. Don't freak out. But when I squeeze it, when I squish it down, I'm taking the air in there and I'm squishing it into a smaller space and I'm increasing the pressure. I'm making the pressure higher so that maybe, in fact, it could pop. We, as humans, tend to think of pressure as a bad thing. But it actually, as an anatomist, pressure is so important. We have to have pressure in the body in order for things to move, right? So my discussion is going to really be on the movement of two different kinds of substances. A gas, which for us is air. That's what moves in and out of our body. That's what we breathe. And a liquid. What's the major liquid that moves around the body? Blood. Good. Yes. And that's our liquid that moves through. Okay, so for both of those, even though they seem very different to you, right, for both gases, and I'm going to write air here, and liquid, and we're really concentrating on blood here. For both of those, there's two rules that kind of govern movement. And both of them have to do with pressure. Okay, so the first one is very logical, right? Pressure always wants to go from where it is higher to where it is lower, right? We want to release pressure. And we can easily measure pressure using different instruments, but whatever the pressure is, it's always going to move in that direction. That's our first rule. Our second rule is that substances move, again, both liquids and gases, when there is a difference in pressure. Okay, so what do I mean by that? I mean that we cannot have equal pressures in two places if we want substances to move. So I'm going to give you an example. Oftentimes when we talk about this, we think of the body as a series of tubes, because it really is, right? This tube could be some kind of a blood vessel somewhere in our body. This tube could be part of our bronchial system, right? Part of the structures that form our lungs. So what I'm saying to you is that whatever the pressure is over here needs to be different than the pressure over here at the other end of the tube in order for substances, gases or liquids, to flow or to move. We also know, because I just told you that we need a difference, right? We need high and low. So our substance would move in that direction, from the higher end to the lower end. Okay, now I'm actually going to start out talking about air and giving you an example of how this movement occurs, because I really can't give you that an example. I can't show it to you in terms of blood. But we'll start out with breathing, and then we'll move on to the heart, right, and the movement of blood. Okay, so around us, the air is a mixture of gases, right, that we breathe in all the time. And so we just refer to it as the atmosphere. That's what we're going to call it. And when we measure the pressure of the atmosphere around us, we use a barometer. And we measure it in nanometers. Okay, nm. So it's pretty stable, the pressure of the atmosphere around us. And I'm going to just throw out a number at you. I hope you're not people who hate numbers, but it is 760 nanometers. That's the standard atmospheric pressure. Okay, where could we go that pressure would be very different than 760 nanometers? Okay, space, that's a great example. Good. Where else? Underwater, right? You have to go pretty deep down. Good. And the opposite of that, somewhere between Earth and space. Where else is it? Mountains, right. You have to very much change your elevation, and then the pressure would change. Now, we don't do this on a regular basis, right? You're not going to run up the mountain to breathe in and out, run back down. We're not going to do that, or go into space, or dive deep under the ocean. So let's go with the pressure of the atmosphere is steady or stable. So in order for you to breathe, you have to change the pressure in the body. You have to change the space. I'm actually gonna turn this around. Should I just turn the whole thing around? I'm gonna go with that. To give me a little more space, okay? So I'm gonna rewrite this for you. So atmosphere is 760 nanometers. If I want air to enter my lungs, so I want to breathe in, the pressure in my chest cavity, in my lung area, has to be bigger or smaller than 760? Smaller. Right. So it has to be less than, I won't even use the symbol. Some people hate symbols. 760 nanometers, because I want to go, I'm always going from high to low. Okay? So we're going from atmosphere to lungs. All right. What happens when you breathe in? When you breathe in, and I'm going to exaggerate, you are totally changing the cavity and the space, more so than you even realize. Because when you breathe in, you are using your muscles, even the area between your ribs spreads, the tubes even spread. So you are greatly changing this space. Change space, which is going to lower the pressure. Now, it doesn't lower a huge amount. Because most times we don't breathe like that. That's not how you're taking every breath, right? It's hard to even see people breathe sometimes. Nursing trick. You put your hand on someone's shoulders to check how often they're breathing. Because if you just stare at them, which is also a little rude, it's sometimes hard to do, okay? Okay, so honestly, on average, when you breathe in, the pressure in the atmosphere, 760, moves into your lungs, which the pressure is 758 maybe. That's it. 1 or 2 tiny degrees lower than what's in the atmosphere. Okay? So we change the space to change the pressure so the air will go in. Okay, and then what happens? You're like a giant accordion. I know it's a very old instrument, or you're like me squeezing the balloon, right? Because here you are. So to breathe out, you squeeze down, right? You press in. All right, we squeeze down. We use muscles again. We make the tube smaller so that we are increasing the pressure. Again, not by much. When you breathe out, the pressure in the lungs is about 761. That's it. But it's higher than the atmosphere, which that's not changing. You certainly don't change it by breathing. And again, we're still going high to low. Okay, so now I have another question. Please stop me if you have a question, by the way. I'm sorry. Do we spend every second of our lives breathing in and out? Someone said yes. If you did, you'd sound like a dog. You'd be panting, right? And you'd get quite ill, actually. Right? So, no, the answer is no. We do not spend every second breathing in and breathing out. There's pauses between. So now, let's go back to my original statement. So I don't want to turn this around again, but I'll turn it around again. Okay, so my original statement is that you have to have a difference in order for movement, again, of air or liquid. So I'm saying to you that there's a period of time when we're not breathing in, we're not breathing out, and therefore, there's no pressure difference. Okay, this can be demonstrated, right? Can't, again, not with blood, but we can with air. So what I'm going to do is I have to tell you before I do it, I'm going to take a breath in, and I'm going to stop. I'm not going to breathe out. I'm not going to be breathing in. I'm just going to be in between, right? So breath in. Right here, this state right here where I'm not breathing in and I'm not breathing out, but I can only stay this way so long and eventually I have to take another breath. Okay? But during that time, the pressure is equalized between the atmosphere and your lungs and nothing else, and nothing is moving. Just to demonstrate that that really does happen, and we do have that state. Okay? All right, let me catch up with myself for just a minute. Okay. All right, I'm going to switch gears now to the heart. And before I even look at this guy here, I want to ask a question. Back in second grade maybe, you learned if someone said to you, why does blood... Don't answer this, Dr. Pennington. Why does blood move through the body? What would your answer be? Why does your blood move?
To carry things from one body to the other.
That's the reason, but what's the force behind why your blood moves?
Your heart.
Your heart, because it's a pump. Absolutely, absolutely, right? You weren't wrong. I just wasn't the question I was asking. The heart is a pump, and it pumps and pushes the blood through. Absolutely. All right, so in order for me to talk about this with you, I did bring a model of a heart. This is much larger than our heart. Your heart's a little bit bigger than your fist, right? So this is enlarged so we can see things. And I want to use this just as a demonstration of very few parts. I'll also share with you that it's sitting like it would sit in me. So whenever you work on anything anatomical, you're concerned with the organ or the subject based on their side. So this is the right side and this is the left side, just like it would sit in me, okay? So I'm gonna open it up. And most of us know that the heart is composed of 4 chambers, right? We as humans have a 4-chambered heart. Not all animals have 4 chambers, but we do. So the upper chambers are the upper smaller chambers called atria, right? So here's the atria over here, and here's the atria over here. And the larger lower chambers are called ventricles. Here's the ventricle over here, and here's the ventricle over here, all right? Blood flows in only one direction in these chambers, from the upper atria to the lower ventricles. So part of you might think, well, that's logical because it's with gravity, upper to lower, but we also have help. We also have valves, right? So valves have one huge purpose. Actually, in the whole body, you have a bunch of valves other places. They prevent backflow. That's their job. So think of them, these little flaps, as doors that only open in one direction. We want to be sure that when blood goes from the upper atria to the lower ventricle, that there's no slosh back there, right? That it doesn't slide back at all. It stays in one direction. Okay. Everybody okay with this? So the white structures in my model are representing these valves that sit, again, between the atria and the ventricles. Most of us recognize that the heart has 2 beats. And although it doesn't sound technical at all, it's referred to as lub-dub. That sounds very technical, doesn't it? So whomever named it that, I don't know, some cardiologist or heart anatomist who knows how long ago, they went on that that's the sound the heart makes when it contracts or beats. And in order to talk about how blood moves, I want you to understand the difference between these 2 beats, okay? So what's going to happen, and I'm going to kind of go over this and then we're going to look at the model, is blood is going to fill both atria. So blood is going to come in from the body and into these into the 2 upper chambers. And when they're filled, and the fill word is really important, they're going to squeeze, like you squeeze a tube of toothpaste. They're going to contract. And we're going to push the blood into the ventricles. Whoop, sorry. That's that's our first contraction, or essentially our lub. Okay. There is a pause now. And the pause is super important. And you might think, well, yeah, the heart's resting. Yes, it's resting, but way more important than it's resting is the two bottom areas, the two bottom chambers are filling. So the ventricles are filling. And again, I can't tell you how important that word is, the filling. After they're filled, then the ventricles contract. And they push the blood out of the heart, right? To outgoing arteries. Arteries are easy to remember. Just remember, A is for away. They're a type of vessel that's always going to carry blood away from the heart. A for away. Okay? Now, this second squeezing of the ventricles is our second heart sound, our second contraction, our dub. Okay, so again, we fill our upper chamber, we fill our atria, they squeeze and contract, lub, they push the blood into the lower ventricles, they squeeze and contract, and the blood exits the heart through the arteries. It is very, very critical that there's lub, pause, dub. You couldn't have all four chambers squeeze at once. If all four chambers squeeze at once, the blood doesn't move and the heart flutters, right? It's a terrible situation. It's a pathological situation. Remember, back to our pressure conversation. So for this to happen, we're building up the pressure in the atria so that the blood moves to the ventricles, and then we're squeezing, we're just like the balloon, we're building up the pressure in the ventricles, so again, the blood exits. Okay, questions on that? All right, now, I am going to share with you, as I shared with Dr. Lang, I do not have a clinical background, right? So I'm not a nurse or a medical doctor that deals with pathological problems. I am a person who deals with the normal situation. But in order for you to understand, really, how important this whole pressure thing is, I do want to talk about a very common pathology that happens, unfortunately, in a huge number of people. So again, we're keeping in mind, we're never forgetting the initial original pressure rules of you got to go from higher to lower and you have to have a difference. So this system works great if a person's blood pressure, the pressure we measure in your vessels, is at a normal level. But we know one of the largest problems, especially in the US, is hypertension, which is the fancy word for high blood pressure. Right? And this hypertension, high blood pressure, is technically 140/90 or higher, right? This is measured in your vessels, So, What happens with a person with hypertension? Here's the ventricles trying to squeeze. Remember that they've got to overcome, they've got to have more pressure than in outgoing vessels. On a person with hypertension, the heart has to overwork. It has to work so much harder and squeeze so much more because it's pushing against it, right? Here's the ventricle, and here's the artery. And honestly, you've got to have higher over here. It's honestly almost like it's pushing back, not letting you open the door and the blood to move through. And in a severe situation, it can't. It can't push. And therefore, the blood isn't flowing, and therefore, unfortunately, the person goes into a crisis and or death. So I know that most people don't understand why that is so bad and what kind of effect it has, and it really can weaken the heart and cause damage in that. All right? Okay, so honestly, that's kind of all I prepared because I didn't know if you had questions. And I know it's a lot. There's always I hate science people. Any good I hate science people? Dr. Pennington kind of hates science. Did you know that? Yeah. But I'm happy to answer questions if you have them. Yes.
So you said that blood flows out of the ventricles into arteries, but what brings the blood to the atria?
Okay, great question. Those are veins, right? So veins is blood returning to the heart. Excellent. So veins bring the blood in. Here's an interesting thing about the heart. The heart, it doesn't use up anything. It doesn't keep anything. The blood that enters into the chambers, it is really like a machine. So blood comes in the chambers and gets pushed right back out. None is kept for itself. None is used, and it's not changed as it moves through the heart. When the blood wants to get oxygen, where does it go? Thank you. Okay, so it has to go to the lungs to get oxygen for the rest of your body, but it can't get it by just... Did you steal my blood? Yeah, that's your claim. There's always one. That's where it goes to gather oxygen, which of course it has to bring to your whole body, right? As somebody mentioned earlier, right? Blood is carrying oxygen, it's carrying nutrients, it's carrying hormones, other chemicals, it's carrying waste to get rid of, which also some of that goes to your lungs for sure. That help you? Okay. Anything else? Yes?
Why do you think it's a benefit to have the heart work as a pump instead of continuous flow?
That's a great question, Nathan. Thanks. Well, I think that in order to keep it moving for the there's two parts to that answer. One, in order to keep it moving. It's not like it's just pouring into a barrel, really. That's one answer. And the second answer, which he might have asked because he knew this. So people are surprised when I show them this model because they say, well, where's the big arteries coming out of the bottom? Doesn't the whole thing flow with gravity? No. From atria to ventricles flows with gravity. But the ventricles have an unusual kind of contraction. Bless you. Okay, so the atria just squeeze like toothpaste, and the blood goes into the ventricles. The ventricles have a twisting motion upward, kind of like a milking a cow sort of thing, because they pour the blood out of what we call the great vessels. These are great vessels, right, on top of the heart. That's where the blood comes out of, comes in and out at the top. So that wouldn't work if you didn't have that extra pump from the ventricles. You'd never get it back out of the top of the heart. Yes?
So the atria, the blood flows from the atria to the ventricles
Yes.
with gravity.
Yes, well, also with it's still contracting. So gravity helps though. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
So what happens when you go upside down? So is it just fully based on contractions, or does blood pool more in the?
Well, you know that because of how our muscles work and the tone of our muscles, being upside down, like you can swallow upside down. Your whole digestive system doesn't switch direction just because you're doing a handstand, right? So it doesn't change. Because it doesn't change because of the way the muscle tone is and because of the way it contracts. But that's a cool thought to have. Did you have another question?
Yes, I was wondering about air pressure. So does that affect any or like cause any joint pain or joint issues or any other body movement like that?
I mean, it can. You know that there's tons of studies done in space. Someone brought that up, and how it's really bad to be in space for long periods of time without gravity, so without pressure, because your bones lose density. The weight of your body, which is in part, there's still some pressure from outside, but the weight of your body is constantly putting pressure on your joints in a good way. If you suddenly gained weight, we're gonna go with a good method. You suddenly are working out every day doing uppers because you want to increase your upper body strength. When you do that, you're putting pressure on those joints, you're increasing your muscle mass, you're also going to increase your bone mass because you're doing that. So it's kind of the opposite can happen, meaning if you didn't have atmospheric pressure or gravity around you, it's bad for muscles and joints. Okay? I hope that answered your question. Okay. I think I went a little outside there. Oh, yes.
Good seeing you too. So you have high blood pressure. You talked about the ventricles. Eventually the pressure equalizes. It becomes a lot harder for the ventricles to overcome that. But talk about what the body tries to do to compensate for that high blood pressure. I mean, it's sort of like someone who works out a lot, their muscles get larger. So
Right. Well, okay, this is the thing. Well, two things I want to mention. One, you have to remember that even though it's miles and miles of blood vessels, we still have a finite space in here for the blood to go, okay? So when the heart has to work overtime, it enlarges. Cardiomyopathy is the clinical name, and so it gets bigger, but it's in a finite space, so it has trouble contracting. It's not good to have a larger heart. So let me also mention in terms of this about athletes, right? So an athlete, especially a professional athlete, actually does a great job of being able to lower their heart rate but increase their oxygen level. Their heart doesn't beat as many times as a non-athlete, like let's go with me, but it's way more efficient. It doesn't have to beat as many times, and they still are oxygenating all their body and their muscles, right? So that's a good change. Athletes have lower resting heart rates than do non-athletes, we'll go with. So the overworking the heart, that's not a muscle you want to get larger. How's that? It's very different, though, than the muscles attached to your bones, right, which we call skeletal muscles. It's a different kind of muscle tissue. Did I kind of get that? So I want to say one more thing, which is what I thought you were going to go, but you didn't, and that's okay.
I always like to keep them guessing.
Because again, think of the miles of blood vessels, but it's still a very distinct space. And we know how much volume of blood you have, right? It changes a little bit depending upon your height and your sex, right? 4 to 6 liters or so, but not everyone has exactly the same amount. But if the pressure in there is too high. If you have a finite volume of blood in a finite space and the pressure is too high, then the most common thing that happens is they give you a pill that reduces your blood volume, right? It's called a diuretic. It makes you lose fluid. Usually through urination, right? So if you have less fluid in that same space, the pressure is going to be lower. That's why people take drugs for hypertension, or antihypertensives is another way to say that.
Time for maybe one more question.
Anything?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let me announce something really quickly. Thank you so much. For the students, so on Wednesday, we're going to meet in the anatomy lab. So that's Moist Science 105. I'll write that down. And we can all write that down, maybe get an email that says that, Dr. Lang. And we are going to look at human heart models and real sheep hearts. So I will have lab coats and goggles unless you have them yourself. If you have them yourself from another class, please bring them. And please wear closed-toed shoes. Please don't wear open-toed shoes. Okay, thank you so much. Email me if you have any questions.
And students, if you can help